A mysterious horse is left to vanish in the desert, but an unknown child breaks the silence of a forbidden bet, and nothing will ever be the same. The sun beat down mercilessly across the vast expanse of the Texas plains. Two imposing ranches divided the territory of New Hope, a region known for its fertile lands and purebred horse breeding. The properties belonged to Arthur Montgomery and Jerome Valdez, men whose families had been competing for power and influence for generations. Arthur, at 62, was a tall, slim man with well-groomed grey hair and a posture that emanated authority. Jerome, 5 years younger, was stocky with distinctive features and a calculated smile that rarely reached his dark eyes. Both had grown up under the shadow of an ancient rivalry, whose origins had already been lost in the memory of the oldest residents of the region. That afternoon, their vehicles kicked up dust on the road, leading to the most isolated point between the two properties, a majestic solitary oak tree that, according to the old-timers, marked a natural boundary between the lands. "Punctual as always, Arthur," observed Jerome, stepping down from his luxury pickup truck. "A rare virtue these days." "Certain traditions must be preserved, don't you think?" responded Arthur, adjusting his hat to protect his eyes from the relentless sun. Behind them, trusted employees carefully unloaded a wooden box from the trunk of Arthur's car. Inside, restless, was Windrunner, a magnificent white horse of rare lineage, the result of years of selective breeding. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" questioned Jerome, his eyes fixed on the animal. "It would be a shame to waste such a fine specimen." "Afraid of losing, Jerome?" provoked Arthur with a restrained smile. "The endurance ritual is a tradition of the plains. My grandfather did it, my father too. It proves the strength of the animal and the wisdom of the breeder." The workers carefully tied Windrunner to the trunk of the oak tree, leaving enough water for 3 days. The plan was simple in appearance. The horse would stay there exposed to the elements as a test of its endurance. Whoever could recover it in better condition would prove the superiority of their breeding techniques. 3 days, as agreed, confirmed Arthur. "On the 4th day, each of us will send a representative. Whoever manages to bring the animal back in better health and vigor wins the bet." What neither man mentioned was the real prize: rights to a spring recently discovered on the border between the two properties, a water source that, in that drought-stricken region, was worth more than gold. "The terms are documented," said Jerome, handing a sealed envelope to his foreman, Damien. "Nobody touches the animal before the deadline." What neither of the ranchers noticed was the presence of watchful eyes observing everything from a distance. Hidden among dried bushes, Annie, an 8-year-old girl, daughter of rural workers in the region, watched the scene with curiosity. Small and agile, she knew those lands like the back of her hand, using hidden trails to move between the ranches. "Poor horse," she murmured to herself, as she watched the men drive away in their luxury vehicles. When everyone had left, Annie remained motionless, contemplating the solitary animal. Windrunner whinnied softly, as if sensing the girl's presence. Their eyes met across the distance, initiating a silent connection that none of the powerful ranchers could have foreseen. At the Montgomery Ranch, Arthur was greeted by his granddaughter Cecilia, recently arrived from the city to spend her vacation. "Grandpa, did you really leave a horse tied up in the middle of nowhere?" questioned the 22-year-old, indignant. "There are traditions you wouldn't understand, my dear," he responded evasively. "Some battles need to be won following the old rules." Meanwhile, at the neighboring property, Jerome was instructing his son, Michael. "Keep an eye on Arthur's men. I don't trust that old fox." The die was cast. What none of them imagined was that this bet would be just the beginning of a series of events that would forever transform the destiny of everyone involved. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. 3 days had passed since the horse Windrunner was tied to the oak tree. In the hot afternoon of the 4th day, Annie returned to the spot, carrying a small gourd with fresh water. Curiosity consumed her, but also a feeling of compassion for the solitary animal. As she approached, she noticed something was wrong. Windrunner whinnied when he saw her, agitated. A few yards from the oak tree, Annie noticed wooden stakes stuck in the ground in a circular pattern with almost invisible wires connecting them. A trap. How awful, murmured the girl, recognizing the type of snare used to capture animals. Carefully, she avoided the wires and approached the horse, which seemed weakened but still majestic. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you," she said, offering water to the animal, which drank eagerly. While she stroked Windrunner's neck, Annie noticed something shiny half buried in the sand near one of the animal's hooves. Crouching down, she dug with her small hands and found a metal medallion with an elaborate crest, an M intertwined with a symbol that looked like a water spring. "This is from the Montgomery Ranch," she whispered, recognizing the emblem she had seen on wagons and gates of the property. The sound of an approaching engine alerted Annie. Someone was coming. Without thinking twice, the girl loosened the ropes. That tied the horse to the oak tree, leaving them loose enough for the animal to free itself with some effort. "Come on, Windrunner," she encouraged, giving a gentle pat to the animal's flank. As if understanding, the horse pulled hard, breaking the fragile rope, and followed the girl, who ran away from the spot. Simultaneously, 2 pickup trucks were approaching from opposite directions, raising dust on the road. On one side, Damien, Jerome's foreman, accompanied by 2 ranch hands. On the other, Theodore, Arthur's trusted employee, with his team. Both arrived at the oak tree at the same time, only to find the place empty, with only pieces of rope swinging in the wind. "Where's the animal?" vociferated Damien, looking accusingly at Theodore. "You got here first, didn't you? Took the horse." "In secret," accused Theodore. The heated argument echoed across the plains while far away, Annie guided Windrunner through narrow trails that only locals knew. By nightfall, they found shelter in a small rocky formation that offered protection against the wind and curious eyes. "Nobody will find us here," the girl assured, taking from her small cloth bag some pieces of hardtack and a handful of corn she had brought in case she found the horse still tied up. Windrunner ate with moderate appetite, still recovering from the days exposed to the sun. Annie watched, fascinated, the bearing of the animal, so different from the working horses she saw every day. In the dim light of night, the girl examined the medallion she had found more closely. Among the dirt encrusted in the grooves of the metal, she noticed small engraved letters: "Promise Spring, Montgomery Property." Intrigued, she tucked the OZ object into the pocket of her worn dress. Meanwhile, at the Montgomery Ranch, the news of Windrunner's disappearance was causing an uproar. "What do you mean, disappeared?" raged Arthur, pounding his fist on the massive wooden table. "That horse is worth a fortune. I bet it was Jerome's doing." Cecilia, his granddaughter, observed the scene with a worried expression. "Grandpa, what if someone freed him out of compassion? Nobody in these lands would dare interfere in our affairs," the rancher responded categorically. At the neighboring property, Jerome was also boiling with anger, convinced he had been fooled by his rival. "Arthur has always been a cheater," he complained to his son Michael, but this time he went too far. Michael, however, seemed thoughtful. "Dad, the ropes were broken, not cut. It looks like the horse freed itself." "Impossible. Those ropes would have held even a wild bull," Jerome retorted. In the dead of night, Annie fell asleep next to Windrunner, curled up against the animal's soft coat which kept her warm. Her small fingers clutched firmly to the medallion like a talisman. Before dawn, the girl was awakened by a soft whinny. Windrunner was alert, his ears pricked. In the distance, lights cut through the darkness. Searchlights from search parties scouring the region. "We need to go," Annie whispered, rising quickly. Without making a sound, she led the horse deeper into the trails of the plains, heading toward the town of Good Fortune, where her grandmother Zelda lived, the only person she fully trusted. The journey would be long and dangerous, but Annie knew shortcuts that no rancher would ever discover. As they advanced under the first lights of morning, the girl had no idea that the medallion in her pocket was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, involving the 2 most powerful families in the region in a dispute that went far beyond a purebred horse. The morning advanced as Annie and Windrunner followed winding trails through the parched vegetation of the plains. The girl remained alert for any sign of pursuers, but trusted her knowledge of the terrain to evade them. "We need to find water," she murmured, noticing that the horse, although stronger than the day before, still showed signs of dehydration. As if understanding, Windrunner slightly altered his direction, deviating from the path Annie had intended to follow. The girl, surprised, allowed the animal to take the lead. "Do you know where to find water?" she asked, intrigued. After half an hour of walking, they reached an area where the vegetation suddenly became greener and more lush. Windrunner quickened his pace, and soon Annie heard the soft murmur of flowing water. Before them, hidden among rock formations, bubbled a small spring that formed a crystalline stream. "Wow, I've never seen this place before," exclaimed the girl, amazed. While Windrunner drank eagerly, Annie explored the surroundings and noticed something strange. Near the rocks that surrounded the spring, there were marks of recent excavation and stakes with colored ribbons driven into the ground. Someone had been studying this location. Crouching down, she found a crumpled paper under one of the rocks. It was a partial map of the region, with technical annotations and numbers she didn't understand, but she recognized the names of the Montgomery and Valdez ranches, with a circular area marked exactly where they were. Windrunner whinnied softly, alerting her. In the distance, male voices were approaching. Quickly, Annie folded the paper and tucked it away with the medallion, mounted the horse and moved away in silence, taking care not to leave visible tracks. At the Montgomery Ranch, Cecilia was leafing through old family albums in the library, when she was interrupted by a heated discussion in the office next door. Approaching the half-open door, she saw her grandfather in tense conversation with two men in suits, whom she recognized as engineers from the city. "Time is running out, Mr. Montgomery," one of them was saying. "If we don't register the rights to this spring soon, we'll lose exclusivity." "That water has belonged to my family for generations," Arthur retorted, agitated. "The papers proving it disappeared along with the horse." Cecilia stepped back, thoughtful. What papers were those, and what relationship did they have with Windrunner's disappearance? Meanwhile, at the neighboring ranch, Michael Valdez was mounting his chestnut horse when he was approached by Damien, the foreman. "Young boss, we found tracks of the missing horse," he informed. "They lead toward the town of Good Fortune." Michael frowned. "Does my father know about this?" "Not yet, sir." "Good," Michael smiled. "Get my jeep ready. I'll go personally, but keep this confidential." In the town of Good Fortune, Ms. Zelda, a 70-year-old woman with sun-wrinkled skin and wise eyes, was preparing her homemade remedies when her neighbor, Teresa, entered breathlessly. "Montgomery's and Valdez's men are searching the area, Zelda," she warned. "They say they're looking for a missing white horse. They're offering a reward." Zelda sighed deeply. "The powerful and their disputes never bring peace to our people. Teresa." The conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock on the back door. Zelda opened it to find her granddaughter Annie, with dusty clothes and an apprehensive look. "Grandma, I need help," the girl whispered. Zelda looked beyond her granddaughter and saw the majestic white horse hidden among the trees in her backyard. "Holy Mother of God," murmured the old woman, making the sign of the cross. "Child, do you realize what you've done?" Annie nodded, determined. "The horse was suffering, tied up in the middle of the plains, and there's more, Grandma. I think I discovered their secret." Showing the medallion and the map she had found, Annie reported everything she had seen. Zelda listened attentively, her wrinkled face becoming increasingly serious. "That spring," she said after a long silence. "The old ones called it Promise Eye. They said there was a sacred document that guaranteed those waters would be for common use by all the towns in the region." "A document?" asked Annie, recalling the conversation she had overheard between the ranchers. "Yes, an ancient deed, signed by the first Montgomerys and Valdezes when they were still friends," explained Zelda. "But that was many generations ago, and many say it's just a legend." Teresa, who was listening attentively, added, "They say the document had a special seal, with the symbols of both families united." Annie took the medallion from her pocket. "Like this one?" The two old women looked admiringly at the object. That gleamed in the girl's small hand. "This could change everything," murmured Zelda. "Guard this treasure well, my granddaughter." On the horizon, a cloud of dust announced that riders were approaching the town. Time was running out, and the pieces of that puzzle were beginning to fit together in unexpected ways. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The sun was beginning to set when Michael Valdez arrived in the town of Good Fortune. Unlike other men in his family, he preferred to travel without an escort, wearing simple clothes that didn't betray his position. He parked his jeep in the central square and observed the movement. Children played, old people chatted on worn benches, and no one seemed particularly concerned about missing horses. "This is better," he murmured to himself. "No fuss." Walking discreetly, Michael headed to a small bar on the corner where he ordered a coconut water and sat strategically to observe the comings and goings of the town. Meanwhile, in the back of Miss Zelda's house, Annie was feeding Windrunner with handfuls of fresh grass. The horse seemed increasingly stronger, recovering his majestic bearing. "We need to find a better place to hide him," commented Zelda, worried. "Soon they'll start asking questions." "Old Tony's barn is abandoned," suggested Annie. "It's remote near the creek." Zelda considered the idea. "It might work, but we'll need his help." Tony was an old cowboy who had worked for both the Montgomerys and the Valdezes, knowing secrets of both families. Currently, he made a living from odd jobs, remaining neutral in local disputes. While Zelda went to talk to Tony, Annie stayed, with Windrunner, examining the medallion and the map again. Intrigued, she noticed there was a small protrusion on the back of the medallion, like a mechanism. When she pressed it, the center of the object opened, revealing a secret compartment where there was a tiny folded piece of paper. With careful fingers, the girl unfolded it, finding a single phrase written in an old hand. "The truth lies beneath the sacred oak." "The oak tree where Windrunner was tied," she exclaimed softly. In the central square, Michael stood up when he spotted an unusual movement near a simple house on the outskirts of the town. Discreetly, he walked in that direction and saw Miss Zelda talking with an elderly man, gesturing emphatically. He approached close enough to catch fragments of the conversation. "It's important for all of us, Tony," the old woman was saying. "That spring should never become private property." Michael froze. They were talking about the spring disputed by his father and Arthur. "The problem, Zelda, is that without the original document, no one will believe the story of the community." "Deed," responded Tony, scratching his thin beard. "What if I told you we have a clue?" Michael's heart raced. That conversation had everything to do with Windrunner's disappearance and the dispute over the spring. He decided to intervene, but before he could approach, he felt a small hand pulling his shirt. "You're not from around here," stated Annie, looking at him suspiciously. Michael turned, surprised to find the girl with the penetrating gaze. "I'm just passing through," he responded evasively. Annie wasn't fooled. "You're Mr. Jerome's son. I've seen you at the ranch." Michael sighed, realizing it was pointless to lie. "And you know where the white horse is, don't you?" The girl didn't respond, but her look said everything. For a moment, they stood in silence, sizing each other up. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Michael finally said. "I want to understand what's happening." Annie hesitated, but something in the young man's sincerity made her make a bold decision. "Come with me, but alone." Meanwhile, at the Montgomery ranch, Cecilia was confronting her grandfather in his office. "You never told me about the spring deed," she accused. "Why so secretive?" Arthur seemed to age 10 years before his granddaughter's eyes. "There are things from the past better left buried, Cecilia. But if there's a document proving the water should be shared, why fight for exclusive control?" The old rancher didn't respond immediately. He walked to the window, observing the horizon where the sun was setting in orange hues. "You think you know the world, my granddaughter, but there are power games that come from generations. Sometimes, what's at stake isn't the resource itself, but the right to control the future." In Good Fortune, Annie led Michael to the old barn on the outskirts, where Windrunner now rested on a bed of fresh hay. The young Valdez was speechless at the sight of the magnificent animal. "You saved him," he murmured admiringly. "He was suffering," Annie responded simply. Michael approached the horse slowly, who showed no fear. "Do you know what this animal represents? He's the symbol of the dispute between our families. not just for the value of the horse, but for what was with him. Annie hesitated for a moment, then took the medallion from her pocket. "This?" Michael's eyes widened. "You found it. This medallion contains the key to understanding the truth about the spring." "I already discovered part of it," responded the girl, showing the hidden message. "The truth is at the oak tree." At that moment, Ms. Zelda and Tony entered the barn, alarmed to see Michael. "What is he doing here?" asked Zelda protectively. "Grandma, he can help us," explained Annie. "He doesn't want the water just for his family. He wants the truth." Michael nodded, extending his hand to the elders. "We may be rivals, but some secrets are too big to remain buried. We need to go back to the oak tree, and we have to be quick." "Why?" asked Tony, still suspicious. "Because my father and Arthur scheduled a meeting for tomorrow at dawn with lawyers and authorities. They're going to formalize an agreement about the spring, without anyone knowing the truth." The four looked at each other, a silent pact forming between them. They would have just one night to unravel the mystery and change the fate that the powerful had mapped out for those lands. The full moon illuminated the path as the small group headed toward the solitary oak tree. Michael drove his jeep carefully, along the dirt roads with Tony beside him in the passenger seat. In the back seat, Miss Zelda and Annie swayed with the movement of the vehicle. Windrunner, for safety, had remained in the barn, well fed and protected. "Are you sure we should do this at night?" asked Zelda, apprehensive. "The plains have their mysteries after the sun goes down." "It's our only chance," replied Michael. "Tomorrow at dawn, my father and Arthur will be there with the lawyers to seal the agreement about the spring." Annie clutched the medallion in, her small hand feeling the weight of responsibility. "The truth lies beneath the sacred oak," she repeated to herself. After almost an hour of travel, they arrived near the location. Michael parked the jeep at some distance for precaution. "We'll go on foot from here," he whispered, "just to be safe." The four walked in silence, guided by the silvery light of the moon. The oak tree appeared majestic on the horizon, its leaves swaying gently in the night breeze. As they approached, they noticed that there were still pieces of the ropes that had tied Windrunner hanging from the branches. "Where exactly should we look?" asked Tony, glancing around. Annie studied the location carefully. The message said, "Beneath the oak. It must be buried." Michael crouched down, examining the soil around the large tree. "The ground seems undisturbed. For a long time, except—" He pointed to an area where the earth seemed slightly different, as if it had been disturbed and then carefully recomposed. "There!" he exclaimed, beginning to dig with his hands. The others joined him, removing the dry earth. After a few minutes of excavation, Tony felt something solid. "I found something." Carefully, they removed a small rusted metal box from the soil, sealed with an old padlock. The group looked at each other, a tense expectation hanging in the air. "How are we going to open it?" asked Zelda. Annie looked at the medallion in her hand and instinctively brought it close to the padlock. To everyone's surprise, the shape of the medallion fit perfectly into the lock. "It's a key," murmured the girl, turning the medallion. With a click, the padlock opened, allowing them to lift the lid of the box. Inside, protected by an aged leather wrapper, was a yellowed document, still well preserved. Michael took a small flashlight from his pocket and illuminated the paper, while Tony, the only one among them who could read well, analyzed the content. "It's the original deed," confirmed the old cowboy, excited. "Signed by Anthony Montgomery and Francis Valdez, the patriarchs of the two families." "What does it say exactly?" questioned Michael, anxious. Tony read aloud. "We, the undersigned, declare that the spring known as Promisai, as well as all waters that flow from it, are and will always be common property of the towns of the region, never to be appropriated for private interests, even of our own families. This pact, sealed in friendship and aimed at the common good, shall be respected by all generations to come." A respectful silence fell over the group as they absorbed the meaning of those words. "My grandfather always talked about this deed," commented Zelda, "but many thought it was just an old man's legend. That's why the dispute over the spring was so important to my father and Arthur," concluded Michael. "They knew about the existence of this document, but thought it was lost forever. And they hid the search behind the bet with the horse," added Annie. "Windrunner was just a distraction." "But why was the medallion there?" asked Zelda. Michael examined the object carefully. "This medallion belonged to my great-grandmother. It was a symbol of friendship between the families, before the disputes began. When the rivalry grew, it was hidden as part of the history no one wanted to remember." As they talked, they didn't notice approaching headlights in the distance. Only when the lights directly illuminated the group did they realize they were no longer alone. 2 cars parked a few yards away. From one of them descended Jerome Valdez, from the other Arthur Montgomery, both with expressions of astonishment at seeing the group gathered around the open box. "Michael, what does this mean?" questioned Jerome, advancing with firm steps. "You found," murmured Arthur, his eyes fixed on the document in Tony's hands. "Yes, we found the truth," replied Michael, standing to face his father. "The truth that you tried to bury." Behind the ranchers, Cecilia stepped out of Arthur's car, looking at the scene with curiosity. "Grandpa, what's going on?" she asked, approaching. "Nothing that concerns you, my granddaughter," the old rancher responded dryly. "Get back in the car." "No," intervened Michael. "She has the right to know. Everyone does." Tony, firmly holding the document, stepped forward. "This deed proves that the spring should never belong to either family. It is a common good, intended for all the towns in the region." "That's an antiquity with no legal value," retorted Jerome, trying to maintain his composure. "Times have changed, laws too." "The law may have changed," responded Zelda, with the wisdom of her years, "but truth and justice remain the same." The air seemed to vibrate with the tension of the imminent confrontation. Annie, silent until then, stepped forward, placing herself between the powerful ranchers and the precious document. "You used Windrunner in a cruel bet," she said with the pure sincerity of children, "just to disguise the search for this paper. But the horse is fine, and now the truth is also saved." Arthur and Jerome exchanged glances, realizing that their carefully architected plans were crumbling before an unlikely alliance between their own children, a child, an old woman, and an aged cowboy. The solitary oak tree, a silent witness to generations of secrets, now watched the confrontation between past and present. Arthur and Jerome remained motionless, their gazes alternating between the document and the determined faces before them. "You don't understand what's at stake," Arthur finally said, his voice betraying an unusual fragility. "This region needs development, control over resources." "What it needs is justice," Michael retorted, standing firm before his father's furious gaze. "Water has always been scarce here. Imagine what would happen if a single family controlled the largest spring in the region." Cecilia, who observed everything with growing understanding, approached her grandfather and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Grandpa, why insist on something that goes against the wishes of our own family's founders?" Arthur stepped away, irritated. "You young people think everything is simple, that we can just ignore decades of disputes and agreements." "Actually," intervened Tony, "that's exactly what this document proposes. Return to the original agreement, established when the families still mutually respected each other." Jerome, who had remained strangely silent, took a few steps, approaching the open box. "May I see?" he asked, extending his hand toward the document. There was a moment of hesitation, but Michael nodded to Tony, who handed the yellowed paper to the rancher. Jerome examined the deed carefully, his fingers caressing the signatures at the bottom of the page. A glimmer of recognition appeared in his eyes. "This is my great-grandfather's handwriting," he murmured almost to himself. "He used to tell me stories about a time when the families lived in harmony." "And why did that change?" asked Annie. With the natural curiosity of children, Jerome and Arthur exchanged glances laden with untold stories. "An old dispute," Arthur answered vaguely. "Over land, over honor, over a woman," completed Zelda, surprising everyone. Marianne, the most beautiful girl in the region at that time, was courted by the heirs of both families. When she chose one of them, the other didn't take it well. "How do you know this?" questioned Jerome, surprised. "Marianne was my grandmother," revealed the old woman with a melancholic smile. "She chose love over wealth, and that changed everyone's destiny." The revelation fell like a bombshell on the group. Cecilia was the first to break the silence. So all this rivalry, all these disputes because of a broken heart generations ago. Annie, who had been closely observing the adults' reactions, stepped forward. Windrunner also chose, she said. He could have gone in any direction when I freed him, but he chose to follow me, then led us to the spring, as if he knew what was important. Michael nodded, thoughtful. Animals have a wisdom that we often lack. They don't carry grudges for generations. Arthur looked at Jerome. Decades of shared memories passing between them silently. Something seemed to be changing, like a crack in a seemingly indestructible wall. "And where is the horse now?" asked Arthur, his tone softer. "Safe," replied. "Annie, protective. Away from your cruel bets." "It wasn't a common bet," Jerome defended himself. "It was an ancient ritual of endurance to prove the strength of—" "It was unnecessary cruelty," interrupted Michael. "Just as it is cruel to deprive entire communities of water out of pride and ambition." A heavy silence fell over the group. The moon continued its journey across the starry sky, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding beneath its light. Finally, Jerome carefully folded the document and returned it to Tony. "We need time to think," he said, looking at Arthur. "We'll cancel the meeting with the lawyers tomorrow." "And what about the spring?" questioned Zelda. "For now, nothing changes," replied Arthur, recovering his authoritative posture. "But I promise that no action will be taken until we resolve this situation." Cecilia exchanged glances with Michael, a silent communication passing between them. Both knew that vague promise wasn't enough. "I think we need something more concrete," said Cecilia. "Perhaps a new document signed here and now, acknowledging the validity of the original deed and committing to respect its terms until a final decision." "That's absurd," protested Arthur. "I'm not going to sign anything in the middle of nowhere without my lawyers present." "Then, Grandpa, are you saying your word has no value?" provoked Cecilia, knowing how to strike at her grandfather's pride. Arthur choked on the insinuation. "My word has always been my most precious asset." "As has mine," added Jerome, not wanting to appear less honorable than his rival. Michael, sensing the opening, took a small notebook and a pen from his shirt pocket. "Then let's record this commitment," he suggested, beginning to write. "Simple and direct, until a final decision is reached on the ownership of Promise I Spring, Mr. Arthur Montgomery and Mr. Jerome Valdez commit to not take any action that interferes with the community's access to water, respecting the spirit of the original deed signed by their ancestors." The two old ranchers looked at each other, cornered by logic and their own pride. After a moment of hesitation, both nodded. "And what about Windrunner?" asked Annie, concerned about the fate of the animal she had saved. "The horse will return to my ranch," said Arthur firmly. "No," protested the girl. "He'll suffer again." "My grandfather wouldn't harm the horse," intervened Cecilia, "and I'll personally make sure of that." Annie looked at the young woman, assessing her sincerity. "Do you promise to take good care of him?" "I promise," replied Cecilia with a gentle smile, "and you can visit him whenever you want." The tension in the air began to dissipate, giving way to a fragile balance, but everyone knew that this was just the first step in a long journey of reconciliation and justice. A week passed since the meeting under the oak tree. News about the discovery of the ancient deed spread quickly through the towns of the region, awakening long-dormant hopes. At the Montgomery Ranch, Cecilia observed from the porch, while Annie carefully brushed Windrunner's white coat. The horse, now fully recovered, displayed impressive vitality. "He seems to like you very much," commented Cecilia, approaching with a pitcher of fresh apple cider. "We understood each other from the beginning," Annie replied simply. "As if he knew I just wanted to help." Cecilia served a glass for the girl and sat on the bench near the stable. "You know, my grandfather was never a man to easily change his mind, but since that night he's different, more thoughtful. Are your grandfather and Michael's father really considering returning the spring to the people?" asked Annie, hopeful. "They're talking about it," Cecilia replied cautiously. "Lawyers, documents, meetings. It's complicated for men like them to admit they were wrong for so long." The sound of an approaching car interrupted the conversation. Michael parked his jeep next to the stable and got out with a discreet smile. "Good news," he announced, joining the two. "My father agreed to attend the community council meeting tomorrow. Will Arthur come too? Cecilia nodded. He confirmed last night, said he'll listen to what the people have to say, which is quite a step forward. Miss Zelda is organizing everything, added Annie enthusiastically. She even has old Tony cleaning the former association headquarters. The three laughed, imagining the old cowboy grumbling as he swept the dusty hall. At that moment, observing the girl's enthusiasm and the growing complicity between the young heirs, it became evident that something greater than a land dispute was transforming. "Do you think they'll really sign the new agreement?" asked Annie, expressing the doubt lingering in everyone's mind. Michael exchanged a meaningful look with Cecilia before answering. "Let's just say we have a plan B, in case stubbornness speaks louder than common sense." The next day, the old Community Association headquarters in Good Fortune was unrecognizable. Colorful banners decorated the exterior of the simple building, and the smell of fresh coffee and cornbread filled the air. Representatives from all towns in the region attended, creating an animated buzz that contrasted with the seriousness of the occasion. When Arthur and Jerome arrived, almost simultaneously, a respectful silence fell over the crowd. The two ranchers, still imposing despite their advanced age, walked side by side into the hall, where chairs had been arranged in a large circle. Ms. Zelda, as the oldest and most respected resident, naturally assumed the role of mediator. Tatimu, her side, Tony carefully held a folder containing the original deed and the draft of the new agreement, prepared with the help of a young lawyer from the region. "I thank everyone for coming," Zelda began, her voice firm despite her age. "We're here to discuss something that affects the future of all our communities, the right to water from Promise Eye Spring." As the old woman spoke, Annie observed the expressions of the ranchers from the corner of the room. Arthur maintained a stern countenance, but his eyes revealed unusual attention. Jerome, meanwhile, drummed his fingers nervously on the arm of his chair. "As everyone already knows, thanks to the courage of some among us," continued Zelda, casting an affectionate glance at Annie, "we recovered the original deed that determines the common use of the spring waters. Now we need to decide how to honor this legacy." The lawyer stood up and began explaining the terms of the new agreement, which essentially updated the old deed to current legal frameworks, ensuring that the spring and its waters remained a common good. Administered by a council with representatives from all towns, including the ranches. When he finished the explanation, all eyes turned to the two ranchers. The silence was almost palpable as they awaited their reaction. Arthur was the first to stand. He adjusted his hat, looked around the room, and then fixed his gaze on Annie. "That girl," he said, pointing to her, "did something that no one dared to do in decades. She questioned the power we believed to be uncontestable, and in the process reminded us of values we had forgotten." A surprised murmur ran through the room. No one expected such an admission from the proud rancher. "The spring was never just about water," he continued. "It was about power, about control, about keeping alive a rivalry that should have been buried long ago." Jerome stood up too, stopping beside his old rival. "Arthur is right, though it pains me to admit it," he said with a half-smile. "We were so stuck in the past that we couldn't see the future we were compromising." The two men exchanged a long look, laden with shared memories of disputes and challenges, but also, surprisingly, of mutual respect long unacknowledged. "We will sign the agreement," Arthur finally declared, provoking an explosion of applause. "With one condition," added Jerome, silencing the premature celebration. "We want to be part of the council not as owners, but as guardians of tradition, to ensure that the history that was almost lost is never forgotten again." Michael and Cecilia exchanged looks of relief and satisfaction. Their Plan B, which involved an extensive public exposure campaign if the ranchers refused the agreement, would not be necessary. Tony brought the folder with the documents, and with slightly trembling hands, Arthur and Jerome signed the new agreement, sealing not only the fate of the spring, but also the beginning of a new era for the entire region. Annie observed everything with eyes bright with emotion. When the ceremony ended, she approached the ranchers timidly. "And Windrunner?" she asked, her concern for the horse still present. Arthur smiled, a genuine smile that few had witnessed in recent years. "The horse proved his worth, just as you," did, little one. He deserves freedom to choose his path." "What does that mean?" asked the girl, confused. "It means," intervened Jerome, "that Windrunner doesn't belong to any specific ranch. He will be the living symbol of our agreement, free to move between all properties just like the water from the spring." Annie's eyes lit up with the idea. "Like an ambassador." "Exactly," confirmed Arthur, exchanging a complicit look with his old rival. "An ambassador of peace between our lands." As the celebration spread across the town square with music, food, and dancing, Michael and Cecilia observed from a distance the two old ranchers talking animatedly, like old friends reuniting after a long separation. "Who would have thought," commented Michael, "that we'd need a child and a horse to heal wounds of generations?" Cecilia smiled, her eyes following Annie, who ran happily among the townspeople, telling and retelling her adventure. "Sometimes we need innocence to see the truth that's right before our eyes." The sun was setting over the plains, casting long shadows across the land that had once divided two families, but now united an entire community. Windrunner, grazing peacefully near the celebration, lifted his head as if sensing the change in the air. For generations, the tale of the white horse and the brave little girl who discovered the truth beneath the oak tree would be told around campfires and dinner tables throughout the region. In the distance, the waters of Promise Eye Spring flowed freely, as they were always meant to, nurturing the land and its people without distinction or preference. Just as the ancient deed had intended, the life-giving resource belonged to everyone and no one, a perpetual reminder that some treasures are too precious to be claimed by any single person. That night, as stars began to pepper the vast Texas sky, Arthur and Jerome sat together on the porch of the community center, two old men finding peace in the wisdom that sometimes comes too late in life. "We wasted a lot of years," Arthur said, softly. "But our grandchildren won't," replied Jerome, "and that's worth something." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Michael and Cecilia joined hands and walked toward the impromptu dance floor, while Annie twirled nearby, her laughter rising above the music like the promise of a brighter tomorrow.